the shadows of a fractured life, where sorrow breeds in the heart of a young girl, Emily, a chilling tale unfolds. After her parents split, she moves to an old house, shrouded in mystery, a haven for a dark entity. School becomes a battleground, bullies her tormentors, but at home, in the eerie silence, she finds an unexpected companion, the entity, thriving on her fear and sorrow. As Emily's world spirals into darkness, the line between victim and predator blurs. Her pain feeds the entity, their bond growing stronger, more sinister. Lost in the grip of an unrelenting darkness, Emily faces a harrowing choice: to break free or be consumed entirely. This is a tale of fear, sorrow, and the unseen shadows that linger in our lives. Welcome to the haunting story of Emily and the Darkness. Emily watched through the car window as the familiar sights of her old neighborhood faded into the distance. Her mother, Sarah, drove in silence, the tension in the car almost palpable. The only sound was the rhythmic wiper blades, sweeping away the persistent drizzle that seemed to mourn their departure. They pulled up in front of a Victorian-era house that stood at the end of a cobblestone street. It was imposing, with its aged, darkened brickwork and towering gables. The for sale sign in the yard swayed slightly in the breeze, as if waving goodbye to its previous occupants. "Here we are, Emily, our new home," Sarah announced, attempting a cheerful tone. The house, while majestic, had an air of neglect. Vines crept up its sides, and the once vibrant garden was now overgrown. Emily hesitated, feeling a strange unease as she stepped inside. The house was spacious, with high ceilings and large windows, but it was shrouded in shadows, giving it a gloomy atmosphere. The following day at school, Emily's apprehension grew. She felt like an outsider in the bustling hallways of Westfield High. Whispers and pointing fingers followed her as she navigated through the crowd. In her first class, a group of girls snickered as she walked in, their eyes scrutinizing her thrift store clothes and unkempt hair. "Looks like we have a charity case," one of them whispered loudly enough for Emily to hear, setting off a round of muffled giggles. Emily's cheeks burned with humiliation, but she kept her head down, trying to ignore them. Lunchtime was no better. Emily sat alone, picking at her food, while the same group of girls sat nearby, casting occasional glances her way and whispering among themselves. She felt their eyes on her, judgmental and cruel. That night, as Emily tried to find comfort in her new room, the house's eerie quietude was unsettling. The creaks and groans of the old structure sounded like hushed conversations in a language she couldn't understand. She tossed and turned, her mind replaying the day's events. The laughter of her classmates echoed in her ears, blending with the strange sounds of the house. Around midnight, Emily was jolted awake by a loud thump from somewhere above her. She sat up, heart racing, listening intently. It was followed by a series of soft scratches, like nails on wood. Her imagination conjured images of unseen creatures lurking in the dark corners of the house. She lay back down, pulling the covers up to her chin, trying to convince herself it was just the house settling. But as she drifted back to sleep, a chilling thought crept into her mind. What if the house wasn't just settling? What if it was trying to communicate something to her? Sleep eventually came, but it was restless, filled with dreams of shadowy figures and whispered threats. Emily woke the next morning, feeling more exhausted than when she had gone to bed, a sense of foreboding lingering in her mind. Ah, my dear nocturnal scholars of the macabre. It's time for a quick scare break. As we linger in these shadowy realms, a small favour I dare to ask. If my tales of terror bring you thrills, do not let our journey end here. Hit like, subscribe, and join our dark congregation. Now shall we delve deeper into the abyss. Let's embrace the darkness once more. Let's get back to the shadows. The morning sun filtered weakly through the curtains of Emily's room, casting long shadows across the floor. She sat at the edge of her bed, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and sadness. She felt lost in this new, alien world, both at home and at school. At breakfast, Emily's mother noticed her downcast eyes and the way she listlessly pushed her cereal around the bowl. "What's on your mind, Em?" Sarah asked gently, sitting across from her. Emily sighed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why is life so hard, Mum? I try to say the right things, make the right choices, but everything just seems to go wrong." Sarah reached across the table, taking her daughter's hands in hers. "Life is a journey, Emily. You're at a point where your body and your brain are changing. You're transitioning from a child to an adult, and it's not an easy process." Emily looked up, her eyes filled with questions. "Your brain is literally being rebuilt. Think of it like a construction site," Sarah continued. "A part of your brain is having a tough time with impulse control and decision-making. It's normal to feel overwhelmed and make mistakes during this phase. But it feels like I'm just messing everything up," Emily murmured. Sarah smiled reassuringly. "It's a phase, sweetie. It will get better. You're growing, learning. These struggles are part of becoming who you're meant to be." Feeling a bit more comforted, Emily headed to school, clutching her mother's words like a lifeline. However, the day quickly soured. In the hallway, a girl from the group that had been tormenting her approached with a malicious grin. Before Emily could react, her backpack was snatched away, and a stinging slap landed across her face. Tears welled in her eyes as laughter echoed around her. Humiliated and in pain, Emily returned home that afternoon, feeling more alone than ever. She retreated to her room, lying on her bed as the evening light faded to darkness. As she lay there, the house began its nightly chorus of creaks and groans. But tonight, there was something different. Amidst the familiar sounds, Emily heard a faint voice, a sinister whisper that seemed to come from the very walls of the room. "I like the taste of your sorrow," it murmured, the words slithering through the darkness like a snake. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She sat up, looking around her dimly lit room, but saw nothing. The voice was gone as quickly as it had appeared, leaving her to wonder if she had imagined it. But the seed of fear had been planted. As she lay back down, her mind raced with questions. What was that voice? Where did it come from? And most importantly, what did it want with her? The days that followed were a blur of torment for Emily. The girls at school, emboldened by their unchecked cruelty, made her life unbearable. Each day was a gauntlet of insults, pranks, and physical intimidation. Emily felt trapped in a never-ending nightmare, both at school and in the solitude of her home. One night, as Emily lay in bed, her thoughts a whirlpool of despair, she felt an inexplicable weight pressed down on her legs. Her heart skipped a beat as she looked up to see a dark, cloaked figure at the foot of her bed. Its form was indistinct, as if made of shadows, but its presence was oppressively real. "I like your sorrow. It tastes so sweet," the figure whispered, in a voice that was both enticing and terrifying. "Who are you?" Emily screamed, terror constricting her throat. At her scream, the bedroom door flew open, and Sarah rushed in, flicking on the light. The figure vanished like smoke, leaving Emily alone with her frightened mother. "Emily, what's wrong?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with concern as she sat beside her on the bed. "I saw something. A figure." Emily's voice trembled as she tried to explain. Sarah hugged her tightly. "It's okay. You're safe now. Remember, your body and mind are going through so many changes. Your hormones are fluctuating, and it's causing spikes in cortisol levels. This stress hormone can cloud your judgment and make everything feel more intense and frightening. Emily nodded, but the fear in her heart didn't subside. She felt something sinister lurking in the shadows of her room, waiting for the lights to go out. The next day was a haze. Emily moved through her school routine mechanically, her mind haunted by the image of the shadowy figure. That night, as she lay in bed, the darkness seemed to thicken and the air grew cold. The entity appeared again, more distinct this time. It hovered over her, its form a swirling mass of darkness. "Your fear feeds me, Emily. Your sorrow makes me strong," it hissed, its voice a chilling melody that played on her deepest fears. Emily lay frozen, terror gripping her like a vice. The entity seemed to grow larger, feeding off her fear and sorrow. Its presence filled the room, suffocating and all-encompassing. She wanted to scream, to call out for her mother, but fear had stolen her voice. Tears streamed down her face as she realized she was facing something beyond her understanding, something that thrived on her misery. The entity's whispers continued, a litany of dark promises and sinister comforts. Emily felt the weight of its gaze, cold and unyielding. She knew then that this was no figment of her imagination. This was real, and it was feeding on her darkest emotions. As the night wore on, the entity's presence lingered, a dark guardian watching over her. Emily lay there, too scared to sleep, too terrified to move, wondering how she could ever escape the grasp of this malevolent shadow. The day had been particularly brutal for Emily. The relentless bullying at school had escalated, leaving her emotionally battered. With no friends to turn to, she felt utterly isolated. By the time she reached home, her spirit was crushed, and her heart was heavy with an unspeakable sadness. As she lay in her bed that night, tears streaming down her cheeks, the familiar, ominous presence made itself known. The entity emerged from the shadows, its form more defined than ever, thriving on her despair. "Oh, hello again," Emily said, her voice empty of the fear that once trembled in it. "At least I can rely on you to show up for me." The entity seemed to smile, a disturbing shift in its shadowy form. "I love your sorrow," it whispered, its voice a dark caress. "Yes, my sorrow," Emily replied, her voice laced with a bitter resignation. "I have it all day, all night, everywhere I go. My life sucks, but at least I got you." The entity paused, a flicker of confusion passing through its dark mist. It was unaccustomed to such acceptance, its existence fueled by fear and terror, not this resigned acknowledgement. In the days that followed, Emily's fear of the entity gradually dissipated. Her life was so permeated with fear and sorrow that the presence of the entity became just another part of her grim reality. It was no longer a source of terror, but a constant in her world of chaos and pain. The entity, puzzled by this change, continued to visit Emily. However, the dynamic had shifted. It was no longer the predator looming over its prey. Instead, it became something akin to a dark, twisted companion in her loneliness. Emily's interactions with the entity took on a new tone. She spoke to it about her day, her bullies, her longing for a friend. The entity listened, its form hovering in the darkness, absorbing her words, her sorrow. But as the days passed, something unexpected happened. Emily's constant exposure to the entity, her acceptance of it as part of her life, began to diminish its power. The entity, once a formidable presence, started to appear less substantial, its form flickering like a shadow under a clouded moon. Emily's transformation was subtle. Her fear, once a palpable thing that consumed her, began to recede. In facing the entity night after night, in accepting its presence as a part of her sorrowful existence, she had inadvertently begun to rob it of its power over her. In this strange, dark companionship, Emily found a bizarre form of strength. The entity, once a symbol of her deepest fears, had become a testament to her resilience, a dark reminder of her ability to endure even in the face of despair. In the quiet of her room, Emily sat on her bed, the entity beside her, a faded form, its once intimidating presence now diminished. She looked at it, an idea forming in her mind. Well, as you need fear, what if I were to tell you where these girls live? The ones who bully me. Maybe you could go scare their pants off instead, Emily suggested, a hint of mischief in her voice. The entity seemed to ponder this, its form wavering like a wisp of smoke. Then it uttered one word: fear. Oh, I think you'll get a lot of fear from them, Emily said, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Though they are bullies to me. My mom often says that bullies act out because they're having a hard time too, maybe at home or with other things. The next day at school, Emily walked down the hallway, her steps light, a sense of anticipation in the air. As she passed one of the girls who usually tormented her, she noticed a change. The girl looked haggard, with dark circles under her eyes, as if she hadn't slept. Another girl approached her, concern etched on her face. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Oh, nothing," the bully muttered, her voice barely audible, her eyes darting around nervously. Back in her room that evening, Emily found the entity more solid than it had ever been. Its form was clearer, more defined, as if it had been revitalized. Emily couldn't help but smile. "So, it was you," she said, a sense of satisfaction in her voice. The entity responded with a single word: fear. In that moment, Emily realized the power dynamic had shifted. The entity, once a harbinger of her own fears, had become an instrument of her will, a shadowy ally against those who had made her life miserable. For the first time, Emily felt a sense of control, a glimmer of empowerment in her otherwise bleak world. Yet, as she looked at the entity, its form stronger and more present than ever, a flicker of doubt crept into her mind. Was she using the entity, or was it using her? The line between empowerment and moral compromise blurred, leaving Emily to ponder the consequences of her newfound power. The entity, with its one-word utterances, remained an enigma, its intentions unclear, but for now, it was a companion in her quest for retribution, a dark echo of her own pain and resilience. Emily walked into school the next day with a newfound sense of confidence, her encounter with the entity still fresh in her mind. She felt different, stronger somehow, as if she were no longer the victim in her own story. As she navigated the crowded hallways, the main bully cornered her, pinning her against the wall with a menacing glare. "What you got for me today?" the bully sneered, expecting Emily to cower as usual. Instead, Emily met her gaze with a calm, almost eerie smile. "What would you like?" "I have a lot to offer," she replied, her voice steady. Confused and thrown off by Emily's unexpected demeanor, the bully released her grip and shoved Emily to the floor, muttering, "Weirdo." Emily looked up, her smile unwavering. There was a new power in her, a secret edge that the bully couldn't comprehend. Back at home, Emily sat in her room, conversing with the now familiar entity. "This one seems to have a lot of issues. Pain, sorrow, fear. I think she'll be perfect for you," Emily said, a hint of darkness in her tone. The entity turned to her, its form more substantial than before, and whispered, "Fear." Emily's smile broadened. She was no longer a mere observer in her life. She was a participant, shaping her own narrative. A few days later, Emily noticed the bully again. The girl who once exuded confidence and cruelty now looked haggard, as if she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were hollow, her movements sluggish, a shell of her former self. As Emily passed by, she whispered under her breath, "Sorrow." No one heard her, but the word hung in the air like a dark promise. In the weeks that followed, Emily began to thrive at school. She made friends, her grades improved, and she found joy in small, everyday moments. The entity visited her often, each encounter strengthening her resolve and her sense of control over her life. Her home life, too, seemed to be on the upswing. Her relationship with her mother grew stronger, and the house, once a place of fear and an uncertainty, now felt like a sanctuary. But as Emily lay in bed each night, listening to the whispers of the entity, she couldn't shake the feeling that this newfound peace came at a price. The shadow that had once haunted her now empowered her, and she wondered what that meant for her soul. The lines between right and wrong, justice and revenge, were blurred in the shadow of the entity. Emily had found a way to cope with her pain, but the question remained, at what cost? Emily sat at the breakfast table with her mother, the morning light casting a warm glow across the room. For the first time in a long while, there was a genuine sense of happiness in her voice. "Mom, things are going so well in school now. I've been making friends and feeling so alive," Emily shared, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "That's wonderful, Emily," her mother exclaimed, relief evident in her tone. "Tell me about your friends." Emily began eagerly. "There's Jo, my first friend. She's really nice, but she's always sad. Her family is super strict, and they discipline her, like in the old days. Whenever I'm with her, I can almost feel her sorrow." She then moved on to another friend. "And there's Sarah. Her parents also split up, but they're always arguing. She brings all that pain to school with her." As Emily spoke, a sudden realization dawned on her. Her words trailed off, and she fell silent, her expression turning introspective. She thought about the entity, how it fed on her fear and sorrow, and then she thought about her friends, about how their pain and sadness seemed to invigorate her, giving her a sense of strength and control. A chilling thought crept into her mind. Was she becoming like the entity, feeding off the pain and sorrow of others? The thought was unsettling, casting a shadow over her newfound happiness. She looked up at her mother, who was watching her with a concerned expression. "Emily, is everything okay?" her mother asked. "Yeah, Mum, everything's fine," Emily replied, forcing a smile. But inside, a turmoil of emotions was brewing. She was no longer sure if the positive changes in her life were the result of her own growth, or if they were fueled by something darker, something she had not intended. The revelation that she might be mirroring the entity's behavior was alarming. It raised questions about the nature of her recent transformation. Was she unwittingly absorbing the negative emotions of others, just as the entity absorbed hers? As Emily left for school that day, her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. She began to observe her interactions with her friends more closely, trying to understand the nature of the connection she felt with them. The joy of making friends was now tinged with the fear that she might be using their pain for her own gain, just as the entity had used hers. This realization marked a turning point for Emily. She knew she had to confront the truth about herself and the entity that lingered in the shadows of her life. The journey ahead was uncertain, but she understood that it was necessary to untangle the complex web of emotions and influences that had come to define her existence. Emily met her friends at school, but their conversations were no longer a source of comfort. As they shared their nightly pains and sadness, Emily felt a surge of strength and vigor coursing through her. The realization struck her like a lightning bolt. She was feeding on their sorrow, just as the entity fed on hers. She rushed home, her heart pounding, her mind racing with fear and confusion. Her mother was still at work, leaving the house eerily silent. Bursting into her room, Emily confronted the empty air. "What have you done to me?" The entity materialized, more solid and menacing than ever. "Sorrow," it whispered, its voice echoing the depth of Emily's realization. In that moment, the entity fully engulfed Emily. It had been feeding on her sorrow, growing stronger with each passing day. But now, it wasn't just feeding on her, it was merging with her. Emily had become a conduit for the entity, her own sorrow amplified by the sorrows of her friends. She had become an integral part of the entity, a vessel for its dark hunger. Emily was never seen again. Her disappearance sent shockwaves through the community. The police searched tirelessly, but no trace of her was found. Her mother was left in a state of inconsolable despair, and the school held a vigil in her memory. Rumors and theories abounded, but the truth remained a mystery. Time passed, and eventually, a new family moved into the house. A young boy, an only child, found himself struggling to adjust to the new environment, missing his old friends and life. One night, as he lay in bed, tears streaming down his face, he felt an inexplicable weight on his legs. Trembling, he looked up and saw a ghostly figure, the image of a young girl, translucent and sorrowful. It was Emily, lost in the grip of the entity, now a part of its haunting legacy. "Sorrow," she whispered, her voice a chilling echo of the entity's call. The boy lay frozen, staring at the spectral figure, as the room filled with a cold, mournful air. The house, with its dark history, had claimed another soul, binding Emily to its walls, her story becoming part of its eerie tapestry. In the haunting whisper of sorrow, the cycle continued, a reminder of the pain and fear that had consumed Emily. Her presence, now merged with the entity, lingered in the house, a ghostly testament to the cost of unaddressed pain and the dark power of sorrow. In the haunting stillness of Echo Beach, a family seeks a peaceful vacation at a secluded beach house, only to find themselves ensnared in a chilling legacy. The ghostly echoes of a tragic shipwreck loom nearby, casting a sinister shadow over the waters. As eerie occurrences unravel, they uncover a dark connection to their own past, and a vengeful spirit demanding a harrowing sacrifice. Dive into this spine-tingling tale where the line between the living and the drowned blurs, and a family's love faces the ultimate test against the restless souls of the deep. Are you brave enough to uncover the secrets of Echo Beach? Chapter 1. Arrival at Echo Beach. The Anderson family's car wound its way down the serpentine coastal road, the sea stretching endlessly beside them, glimmering under the afternoon sun. After months of relentless work and school schedules, the secluded beach house at Echo Beach promised a much-needed retreat. As they approached their destination, the car turned onto a narrow path, shrouded by overhanging trees that whispered secrets to the ocean breeze. The path opened up to reveal a quaint, two-story beach house, perched like a lone sentinel overlooking the sea. Its weathered wooden exterior and wide, welcoming porch spoke of years witnessing the ever-changing moods of the ocean.
"Wow,"
gasped Emily, the youngest at 12, her eyes wide with excitement. She was the adventurer of the family, always ready to explore and discover. Her bright red hair, usually a fiery cascade, was tied back in anticipation of beachside explorations. Beside her, 16-year-old Alex was engrossed in his book, but looked up to survey the house through his glasses. A quiet, thoughtful presence, Alex preferred the company of his books and music, often lost in his own world of melodies and words. Sarah, their mother, shared a smile with their father Mark as they unloaded the car. A high school teacher. She had the summer off, but Mark, a software engineer, had taken a rare break from his hectic work life. Mark's strong, reassuring presence had always been the family's anchor. As they entered the house, the interior revealed a cozy living space, a blend of rustic charm and modern comfort. Large windows framed the breathtaking view of the beach, inviting the outside in. The beach house, isolated from the nearest town, offered a tranquility they had all craved. There were no neighbors for miles, just the endless expanse and the rhythmic sound of the waves.
"This is perfect,"
Mark declared, wrapping an arm around Sarah.
"No emails, no calls, just us and the sea."
The family spent the rest of the afternoon settling in. Emily and Alex claimed their rooms, their excitement palpable. Sarah unpacked the kitchen, already planning meals that would bring them together after days spent on the beach. As evening approached, the family gathered on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sea turned a dark blue, almost black, and the first stars appeared in the twilight sky.
"It's beautiful here,"
Sarah said softly, a sense of peace settling over them. But as the light faded, a faint, almost imperceptible sound drifted on the breeze, a distant, mournful singing, like a lament lost in time. The family glanced at each other, a hint of curiosity in their eyes.
"Probably just the wind,"
Mark said with a reassuring smile. But as they turned in for the night, the sound lingered in their minds, a whisper from the deep, calling out to the unknowing visitors of Echo Beach. Chapter 2. Echoes on the shore. The sun's early rays filtered through the curtains, gently rousing the Anderson family from their deep, undisturbed slumber. Mark was the first awake, feeling more refreshed than he had in months. He padded softly through the house, intent on brewing a pot of coffee, when he stopped abruptly. There, on the wooden floor, were wet footprints, trailing from the front door through the living room and disappearing into the hallway. The prints were small, like those of a child, and inexplicably, there was no sign of water anywhere else. Puzzled, he called Sarah, who came downstairs with Emily and Alex. They all stared at the mysterious footprints, their relaxed mood from the night before giving way to confusion.
"Maybe a window was left open and a stray animal came in?"
Sarah suggested, though the idea seemed far-fetched. Unable to find an explanation, they decided to shake off the odd occurrence and head to the beach, looking forward to a day of sun and relaxation. The beach was a pristine stretch of golden sand, with the ocean stretching endlessly before them. In the distance, the skeletal remains of an old ship protruded from the water, its timbers worn and battered by time and tide.
"Look, Dad, what's that?"
Emily pointed excitedly at the shipwreck. Mark gathered the family around and began to recount the tale, a local legend he had read about before they arrived.
"Many years ago,"
he began, his voice taking on a somber tone,
"a ship called the Sea's Lament was caught in a terrible storm. The captain tried to navigate the treacherous waters, but the ship struck those rocks out there."
He pointed to a jagged outcrop, barely visible above the waves,
"and sank, taking all aboard with her. They say the crew and passengers never found peace, their spirits trapped forever, reliving that fateful night."
The story sent a chill down their spines, the haunted shipwreck, casting a shadow over their sunny day. The family tried to brush off the eerie tale, spending the rest of the day building sandcastles, swimming, and enjoying a picnic. Yet, the image of the shipwreck lingered in their minds, a silent sentinel watching over them. As dusk fell, they returned to the beach house, tired but content. Sarah cooked a hearty meal, and they all sat down to eat, sharing stories and laughter, the morning's mystery temporarily forgotten. Later, As Alex retreated to his room, he was startled to find his bed soaked, as if drenched by seawater. The smell of the ocean was strong, and the sheets were cold and clammy to the touch.
Mom! Dad!
He called out, panic edging his voice. Mark and Sarah hurried upstairs, equally baffled by this new, inexplicable occurrence. They changed the bedding, trying to rationalize the situation. Maybe the humidity had caused condensation, they suggested, though the explanation felt hollow. That night, as they settled into their beds, an unsettling feeling hung in the air. The ocean's whisper seemed louder, more insistent, as if calling out to them from the depths of its dark, unending expanse. It's time for a quick scare break. As we linger in these shadowy realms, a small favour I dare to ask. If my tales of terror bring you thrills, do not let our journey end here. Hit like, subscribe, and join our dark congregation. I must extend my deepest, most sinister thanks to those souls brave enough to support our chilling journey. Your contributions, kindred spirits, are the lifeblood of our channel. They help me continue to craft the haunting tales that send shivers down your spine and keep you awake at night, pondering what lurks in the shadows. If you too find yourself captivated by our chilling chronicles and wish to help the channel, consider clicking the thanks button below. Your support, dear viewer, is not just a contribution. It's a lifeline that allows me to continue weaving these terrifying tales just for you. Let's embrace the darkness once more. Let's get back to the shadows. Chapter 3. Whispers in the night. The children were asleep, and Mark and Sarah settled on the porch with a couple of drinks, watching the waves dance under the moonlight. The soft murmur of the sea was a soothing backdrop to their conversation.
Imagine if we could do this every day.
Sarah sighed contentedly, her gaze fixed on the horizon.
No work, no stress, just the sea and us.
Mark nodded.
That would be the dream, wouldn't it?
They sat in comfortable silence, each lost in thoughts of a life far removed from the pressures of the everyday. As the clock neared midnight, they decided to head to bed.
I'll just check on the kids,
Sarah said, her voice a whisper in the quiet house. She found Alex in his room, headphones on, lost in his music. She smiled softly, watching him for a moment before moving to check on Emily. But Emily's bed was empty, her room silent and still. A surge of panic rose in Sarah's chest. She checked the bathroom, then began frantically searching the house, calling for Mark.
Mark, Emily's not in her bed.
Sarah's voice was tinged with panic. Together they searched, calling Emily's name, but there was no response. Mark, his heart pounding, stepped outside, scanning the darkened beach. There, in the distance by the shore, was a small figure.
Emily!
He shouted, relief and fear mingling in his voice. They raced towards her, finding her standing by the water's edge, staring out into the darkness, her gaze fixed on the distant wreck.
Emily, what are you doing out here? Do you have any idea how dangerous this is?
Sarah's voice trembled with a mix of relief and fear. Emily turned to them, her eyes distant.
Someone was calling my name.
She said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark and Sarah exchanged a look of disbelief and concern. They quickly ushered her back to the house, firmly telling her never to wander to the water in the dark again. Once inside, with Emily safely in bed, Mark and Sarah sat in the living room, their minds racing.
Do you think it has anything to do with the wreck? Or the footprints and the wet bed?
Sarah asked, her voice laced with worry. Mark ran a hand through his hair, his expression troubled.
I don't know, but this is starting to feel wrong. Maybe it's just a series of strange coincidences, but
what?
Sarah pressed.
But maybe we should consider leaving.
Mark said reluctantly.
I don't want to overreact, but I can't shake this feeling. Something about this place isn't right.
They sat in silence, the weight of their decision hanging heavily in the air. The once peaceful beach house now felt charged with an unseen, unsettling presence, as if the echoes of the past were reaching out to them from the depths of the sea. Chapter 4. Shadows on the shore. The next morning, a sense of foreboding filled the air as the Anderson family awoke. Once again, wet footprints adorned the floor of their beach house. This time, however, there were multiple sets, weaving a chaotic pattern in and out of the rooms.
This is too much.
Mark declared, his face etched with concern.
We'll spend one more day here. If anything else strange happens, we're leaving.
Trying to push their worries aside, the family headed to the beach, determined to enjoy what could be their last day in this eerie paradise. In the middle of the day, the tranquility was interrupted by the sound of a moped approaching. A small vehicle with a box attached to it came into view, pulling up near the house. Sarah watched with a mixture of curiosity and caution.
Should they be here?
She asked Mark.
Yes,
He replied.
they deliver fresh supplies every other day. That was part of the deal, so we never have to leave.
They greeted the delivery man, introducing themselves as he unloaded boxes of fresh food and other necessities. His name was Joe, and he had a friendly, easygoing manner.
So, how do you like the house and the beach?
Joe asked, making conversation as he handed over the supplies.
It's beautiful here.
Sarah said, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. The conversation inevitably turned to the wreck visible from their beach. Joe leaned against his moped, a serious look crossing his face.
You know, on certain nights, you can hear the voices of the drowned.
He said in a hushed tone.
There are rumors that they come to the beach at night, reliving their final moments, being drowned over and over again.
The family exchanged uneasy glances. Joe continued.
They say the captain of the Sea's Lament sunk the ship on purpose, wanted to crash it and take everyone down with him.
Mark and Sarah felt a chill run down their spines, the children's eyes wide with fear.
Why would he do that?
Alex asked, his curiosity piqued despite the fear.
Some say he was mad, others that he made a pact with dark forces. But whatever the reason, those souls haven't found peace. They say you can feel them, especially on nights like tonight, when the moon is full and the sea is restless.
As Joe drove away, the family was left to ponder his words. The beach, once a symbol of relaxation and escape, now felt like a boundary between the living and the spirits of the past. That evening, as they sat in the house, the sound of the waves seemed louder, more insistent. Outside, the full moon cast a ghostly glow over the beach, and the wreck in the distance looked more ominous than ever. Mark and Sarah looked at each other, the same thought unspoken between them. This was no longer the idyllic vacation they had imagined. The echoes of the past were too loud, too close, and they feared what the night might bring. Chapter 5. A Light in the Darkness. On the porch, under a starlit sky, Mark and Sarah sat together, each nursing a drink. The sea spread out before them, its vastness a canvas of tranquility and mystery. The gentle sound of the waves was a soothing serenade, contrasting sharply with the turmoil of the past days.
Maybe we're just not used to this,
Mark mused, his eyes reflecting the moonlit sea.
Our lives have been a constant cycle of work and repetition. Like those poor souls on the ship, reliving their fate day after day.
Sarah nodded, her gaze lost in the rhythmic dance of the waves.
We're caught in the monotony of our daily lives, working ceaselessly just to snatch a week or two of freedom each year. That's not really living, is it?
Their conversation wandered through the parallels between their lives and the tragic loop of the shipwreck's lost souls. The idea of breaking free from their own repetitive cycle seemed both alluring and daunting. As they delved deeper into their thoughts, a strange phenomenon caught their attention. A greenish glow emanated from the direction of the wreck, casting an eerie light over the water.
What in the world?
Sarah whispered, her eyes wide. Mark squinted, trying to make sense of the sight.
It might be natural, like the northern lights. Bioluminescence, maybe?
He tried to sound logical, but the bizarre luminescence near the haunted wreck sent a shiver down his spine. Despite the odd occurrence, the night passed without incident. The gentle sounds of the ocean and the distant call of nocturnal birds were the only disturbances in the peaceful darkness. However, the next morning brought a return to the unsettling mysteries of the house. Once again, wet footprints meandered through their temporary home, more numerous than before, a silent testament to unseen visitors. Despite the beauty of the place and the peace of the previous night, the constant strange occurrences were taking their toll. The glowing wreck, the unexplainable footprints. It was becoming too much.
We should leave today.
Mark finally said, a decision forming in his mind.
This place, its beauty, its mystery. It's enchanting, but it's not right for us.
Sarah nodded in agreement, a mix of relief and disappointment in her eyes. They had sought a break from the monotony of their lives, but not at the cost of their peace of mind. As they prepared to pack their things, a sense of unease lingered. The echoes of the beach house's secrets whispering to them, as insistent as the tides. Chapter 6. The Storm and the Spirits. With their belongings hastily packed, the Anderson family prepared to leave the beach house. As they loaded the car, Sarah's voice was tinged with urgency.
We need to hurry. There's a storm coming, I heard the weather report. The heat and humidity are just right for a tempest.
As they began their drive, the familiar path leading from the house had vanished, now obscured by dense brush and overhanging branches, as if nature itself conspired to keep them from leaving. Mark stopped the car and got out, intent on clearing the way, but the vegetation was impenetrably thick, as if the trees had intertwined overnight to seal their exit. Just then, the skies opened up, unleashing a torrential downpour. Rain pelted down hard, driven by powerful winds, as Mark struggled against the elements, attempting to clear a path.
Let's go back to the house.
Sarah yelled over the howling wind.
We can wait out the storm and leave afterward.
Reluctantly, Mark agreed, and they retreated to the relative safety of the beach house. Inside, they watched as the storm raged on, the winds howling like angry spirits, the rain lashing against the windows. The hours ticked by, the storm showing no signs of abating. Night fell, enveloping the house in darkness, lit intermittently by flashes of lightning. As Mark gazed out at the sea, his eyes caught something that chilled him to the bone. On the shore, illuminated by the storm's eerie light, were greenish glowing figures, ethereal, almost otherworldly. They stood motionless, gazing out to sea, a spectral reminder of the shipwreck's lost souls.
This is impossible,
Mark whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm. Sarah joined him at the window, her eyes widening in disbelief.
Who are they?
She asked, her voice a mix of fear and fascination.
I don't know.
Mark replied, his mind racing.
But we can't leave. We need to lock the doors.
As they secured the house, the reality of their situation set in. Trapped by the storm, with the haunting presence of the drowned just beyond their walls, the night stretched before them, filled with uncertainty and fear. The terror of the night had just begun, and the Anderson family braced themselves, wondering what other secrets the beach house and its ghostly shores might reveal. Chapter 7. The Captain's Lament. With their hearts pounding, Mark and Sarah bolted the doors and reinforced the windows, their eyes darting to the shadowy figures outside. More and more of the drowned appeared, their faces etched with the agony of their last moments. As they stared out towards the shipwreck, a chilling shift occurred. In unison, they turned towards the house, their waterlogged faces contorted in pain and despair.
They're coming this way.
Sarah whispered, fear tightening her voice. Together, they checked every potential entry point, ensuring they were as secure as possible. The figures outside, their movements slow and deliberate, began to converge on the house. The sound of their hands, wet and heavy, started to pound against the doors and windows. Huddled together in the living room, the family clung to each other, the terror palpable in the air. The relentless banging seemed to go on forever, an echo of the drown's eternal torment. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the banging ceased. A heavy silence fell over the house. Mark cautiously approached the window, his heart racing. Gently, he pulled back the curtain, and there, just on the other side of the glass, stood the captain of the Sea's Lament. His eyes were hollow, his face a ghastly visage of a soul lost to madness. He was known in the legends as Captain Ellis Morgan, a man whose mind had been shattered by unseen forces. As Mark's eyes locked with Captain Morgan's, he was suddenly engulfed in a vision of the ship's final moments. The Sea's Lament was a scene of utter chaos and horror. The passengers screamed and cried, their voices a cacophony of terror, as Captain Morgan locked himself in the bridge, his mind assailed by ghostly whispers driving him to madness. In the vision, Mark could see the storm raging around the ship, the waves monstrous in their fury. Captain Morgan stood at the helm, his eyes wild, muttering about voices and a dark pact that demanded the souls aboard. The passengers banged on the door of the bridge, pleading with him, but their cries fell on deaf ears. As the ship struck the rocks, the scene turned even more terrifying. The ocean swallowed the Sea's Lament whole, dragging everyone into the abyss. The last thing Mark saw in the vision was Captain Morgan's face, twisted in a grotesque smile, as the sea consumed him. Gasping for breath, Mark staggered back from the window, the vision fading, leaving him in the dimly lit room of the beach house. Sarah rushed to his side, her eyes wide with concern.
We have to get out of here,
Mark managed to say, his voice shaking.
Whatever is happening, we're not safe.
But outside, the storm continued to rage, and the drowned still surrounded the house, a silent, ghastly vigil. They were trapped, with nowhere to run, and the night was far from over. Chapter 8. Into the Abyss. Panic seized Mark as he realized Emily was missing.
Where's Emily?
He shouted, his voice a mix of fear and desperation. As he scanned the room, the figures outside began to dissipate, like mists fading in the dawn. But when they looked out the window, the glow of the wreck in the distance was unmistakable.
They've got her. I know it,
Mark said, his voice strained with certainty.
What can we do?
Sarah's voice trembled, her eyes wide with fear.
I'm going out there,
Mark declared, determination stealing his voice.
to the wreck.
Sarah tried to stop him, but he looked at her, his resolve unwavering.
Our little girl.
He said simply. Understanding the depth of his resolve, Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes. Mark hurriedly unpacked his paddleboard from the car and slipped into his wetsuit. With a final look back at Sarah and Alex, huddled together on the beach, he pushed off into the dark, tumultuous sea, paddling towards the eerie green glow of the wreck. The night was oppressive, the sounds of the storm and the sea melding into a haunting symphony. As Mark paddled, he peered into the depths below. There, in the dark water, the greenish, ethereal images of the drowned stared back at him. Their faces, a canvas of doom and sadness, seemed to watch him with a mix of curiosity and despair. Despite the fear gripping his heart, Mark paddled on, driven by the singular thought of finding his daughter. The wreck loomed closer, its ghostly light a beacon in the unforgiving night. Each stroke of his paddle brought him nearer to the unknown, to the heart of the mystery that had ensnared his family. The sea swelled around him, as if trying to dissuade him from his quest, but nothing could turn him back. Not the storm, not the drowned, not the chilling depths of the ocean. Somewhere in that haunting glow lay answers, and Mark prayed, his daughter Emily. Chapter 9. The Captain's Ultimatum. As Mark reached the shipwreck, his voice echoed across the churning sea.
Emily.
A portion of the ship jutted above the water, a ghostly silhouette against the dark sky. In response, a faint cry pierced the darkness.
Emily.
Mark called again, his heart racing as he moved towards the sound. There, across a broken span of the wreck, sat Emily, her small form barely visible.
They grabbed me, Daddy.
She said, her voice trembling with fear.
I've got you, baby girl.
Mark reassured her, his voice a mix of relief and determination. He leapt across the gap between them, reaching out to grab her. Just as he was about to reach her, a voice from behind stopped him cold.
Take her back before he sees you.
Rasped the voice of one of the drowned. Mark turned to see the ethereal figure of a man, his face bloated from the sea, seaweed hanging from his waterlogged form. Ignoring the warning, Mark grabbed Emily, preparing to place her on the paddleboard. But then, another figure emerged from the dark waters. The captain, Captain Elias Morgan, his presence malevolent and commanding. The captain's voice was chilling, filled with an evil that seemed as deep as the sea itself.
You have a choice,
he said to Mark, his eyes gleaming in the ghostly light.
Give yourself and your soul to the depths willingly, or I will take both of you, and then the rest of your family by force. A willing soul is so much more satisfying. The voices,
the captain continued, his smile twisted and cruel.
They want me to stay. They hunger for more souls to join our eternal torment.
Mark held Emily close, his mind racing, the realization that the captain was bound by some ancient, dark pact, a hunger for souls that kept him and his crew trapped in this watery grave, filled him with horror. He looked into the ghastly face of the captain, then down at Emily, her eyes wide with fear. Mark knew he couldn't let this malevolent spirit take his daughter or any of his family. He had to make a choice, but the thought of sacrificing himself was almost unbearable. Yet, the love for his family, the need to protect them, surged within him. The storm raged on, the sea churning around the wreck, a tumultuous backdrop to the standoff. Mark, with his daughter in his arms, faced the captain, his decision weighing heavily on his heart. The fate of his family, the curse of the sea's lament, and the depth of a father's love all hung in the balance. Chapter 10. Father's Sacrifice. The beach was shrouded in darkness, the sea a vast expanse of uncertainty. Sarah and Alex stood on the shore, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of Mark and Emily. Suddenly, Sarah's heart leapt.
There!
She cried, pointing towards a shape emerging from the darkness. On the paddleboard, a small, lone figure sat. The board seemed to glide through the water as if propelled by some unseen force.
Emily!
Sarah screamed, her voice breaking with relief and fear. As Emily reached the shore, Sarah enveloped her in a desperate embrace.
Where's your dad? Where's Mark?
She cried, her eyes searching the sea for her husband. Emily, her eyes filled with tears, looked up at her mother.
Daddy.
She began, her voice trembling.
He said to tell you.
She paused, taking a deep, shuddering breath.
He said, I will die for you because I cannot live with losing you all. You are my heart, my life. Take care of each other. Remember, my love for you is eternal, just like the sea.
Sarah's knees buckled as the weight of Mark's sacrifice hit her. Alex, tears streaming down his face, wrapped his arms around them both. They stood there, a family united in grief, the sound of the waves, a somber melody to their heartache. Mark's last words echoed in their minds, a testament to the depth of his love and the magnitude of his sacrifice. He had faced the darkness, the echoes of the past, to save his family, choosing to give himself to the sea's cold embrace rather than lose those he held most dear. The beach, once a place of escape and tranquility, had become a memorial to a husband and father's love, a love so profound that it transcended the boundaries of life and death. The Anderson family, forever changed, held each other close as the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, a new day born from the night's unimaginable sacrifice. Final chapter. The guardian of Echo Beach. Months had passed since the Anderson family's fateful vacation at the beach house. The seasons changed, and with them, another family arrived, eager to enjoy the tranquility of Echo Beach. The Johnson family, consisting of Jack and Linda, and their 2 children, Mia and Dylan, unloaded their car, their faces beaming with excitement. The beach house, unchanged in its rustic charm, welcomed them with open arms. They spent the day under the sun, building sandcastles and laughing in the waves, blissfully unaware of the house's sorrowful history. As night fell, they gathered on the porch, the sound of the waves a soothing backdrop. The children were full of stories from the day, their laughter a balm to the lingering sadness of the beach. But as the night deepened, a strange phenomenon caught their attention. Off in the distance, near the edge of the water, a faint, greenish light appeared. As they watched, it took on a more defined shape, the ethereal figure of a man staring back at them with a melancholic gaze. The figure stood motionless, his eyes seeming to reflect the moonlight. It was Mark, bound to the beach by his sacrifice, his spirit lingering where his heart had chosen to stay. Jack, sensing something profound and unexplainable in the figure's presence, whispered,
"Who is that?"
Linda, her eyes fixed on the spectral form, felt an inexplicable sense of peace.
"I don't know, but he seems sad."
In the moonlit night, the figure of Mark watched over the beach house and its new inhabitants, a silent guardian tethered to the place of his ultimate sacrifice. His presence, though ethereal, was a testament to the enduring power of love and the profound depths of a father's devotion. The Johnsons, unaware of the full story, felt a strange comfort in the figure's presence, as if he was a protector of the beach and all who came to find solace in its embrace. And so, the beach house at Echo Beach continued to welcome visitors, holding within its walls the echoes of the past and the silent vigil of a father's eternal love. The sea, ever-changing yet constant, whispered its secrets to those who would listen, the story of a man who loved his family beyond the bounds of this world. In the dead of night, where shadows whisper secrets of the unseen, a couple's quest for the paranormal turns into a chilling nightmare. Mark and Jenna, avid ghost hunters, are drawn to an ancient graveyard, haunted by elusive shadow people. Capturing a sinister figure on camera, they unknowingly invited darkness into their lives, a presence that follows them home, lurking in corners, watching, waiting. As reality warps and their world is consumed by the shadow realm, they discover a terrifying truth. Some doors, once opened, may never be closed. Their disappearance leaves only whispers and a haunting question. What lies within the shadows? Join us, if you dare, in uncovering the mystery of Mark and Jenna, lost in the darkness forever. The gentle hum of the city at night filtered through the slightly ajar window of Jenna and Mark's modest living room. They were nestled together on the old creaky couch, their eyes fixed on the laptop screen, that cast an eerie glow in the dimly lit room. The latest episode of Paranormal Mysteries Unveiled, a popular YouTube series, was streaming, featuring shadowy figures and unexplained phenomena. "That's just camera tricks, right?" Jenna asked, her skepticism thinly veiled in her tone. Mark, ever the believer, shook his head. "Not always. Some things are beyond our understanding." On the screen, the host's voice grew more intense as he introduced a new segment. "And now, we take you to the heart of an ancient mystery, the Old Willow Graveyard, a site of numerous shadow person sightings. This next footage is truly chilling." The video shifted to a grainy night vision shot of an old graveyard. The camera panned slowly, the eerie outlines of tombstones and gnarled trees casting long, sinister shadows. Then a fleeting glimpse of something darker, a shadow moving against the backdrop of other shadows, almost indistinguishable but undeniably there. Jenna's skepticism wavered. "That looked, real." Mark leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Wait, isn't Old Willow just an hour's drive from here?" "Yeah, it is," Jenna replied, a mix of excitement and apprehension in her voice. The couple shared a glance, a silent agreement passing between them. They were both avid paranormal enthusiasts, and the thrill of a real-life investigation was too tempting to pass up. "We should check it out," Mark said, his voice a mixture of eagerness and caution. "Tomorrow night, we could try to capture something, see if there's any truth to this." Jenna nodded, the thrill of the unknown overcoming her initial hesitation. "Let's do it, but we need to be prepared. Cameras, infrared, the works. If there's something out there, we'll find it." The rest of the evening was spent in a flurry of planning. They gathered their equipment, a digital camera with night vision, an infrared thermometer, a voice recorder for EVP, electronic voice phenomena sessions, and, as a precaution, a small container of salt, an old folklore remedy for warding off evil spirits. As they prepared, a sense of foreboding hung in the air, unspoken but palpable. The mystery of the Old Willow Graveyard beckoned them, its secrets shrouded in the shadows of the unknown. Neither of them could shake off a chilling thought. Were they merely going to observe, or were they about to awaken something that lurked in the darkness, something that was better left undisturbed? The question lingered, unanswered, as they set off under the cloak of night, heading towards a destiny that was as uncertain as the shifting shadows in the old graveyard. Ah, my dear nocturnal scholars of the macabre. It's time for a quick scare break. As we linger in these shadowy realms, a small favour I dare to ask. If my tales of terror bring you thrills, do not let our journey end here. Hit like, subscribe, and join our dark congregation. Now shall we delve deeper into the abyss? Let's embrace the darkness once more. Let's get back to the shadows. The drive to the Old Willow Graveyard was a blend of nervous anticipation and excitement. The car's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the winding country road that snaked its way through the dense woodland. Jenna and Mark spoke little, each lost in their thoughts, their minds teetering between skepticism and hope. As they neared their destination, the trees seemed to lean in closer, as if to whisper secrets long forgotten. The Old Willow Graveyard emerged from the darkness, its wrought iron gates standing like silent sentinels to a world beyond. The air was thick with a sense of history and the unspoken tales of those who lay resting within its confines. "We're here," Mark said, his voice barely above a whisper, as he parked the car along the gravel path just outside the gates. The couple equipped themselves with their cameras and other gear, their steps tentative as they entered the graveyard. The moon, veiled partially by scudding clouds, cast an otherworldly glow over the tombstones, creating elongated shadows that danced with every rustle of the wind. They spent the first hour walking among the graves, occasionally stopping to take pictures or film certain locations. Mark tried to capture any temperature anomalies with the infrared thermometer, while Jenna recorded ambient sounds, hoping to catch any EVPs. But the night remained still, almost disappointingly so. No luck, Mark sighed, checking his camera for the umpteenth time. It's quiet. Too quiet. Jenna nodded in agreement, her eyes scanning the horizon. Maybe it's just a story after all. They decided to call it a night, feeling a mixture of relief and disappointment. As they drove back, the silence in the car was a stark contrast to their earlier excitement. Back home, they immediately began reviewing the footage, fast-forwarding through hours of uneventful recordings. Just as they were about to give up, Mark paused the video. "Did you see that?" On the screen, a shadowy figure briefly appeared, peering out from the entrance of a tomb before quickly vanishing back into the darkness. The suddenness of its appearance was startling. "Rewind that!" Jenna exclaimed, her heart racing. Mark obliged, and they watched the figure emerge and disappear again. That can't be." Intrigued and unnerved, Jenna picked up her digital camera, scrolling through the photos they had taken. As she reached the last photo, her breath hitched. There, next to their car, stood a shadowy figure. It was tall and indistinct, but unmistakably human-shaped, and it appeared to be looking directly at the camera. "Oh my God, Mark, look at this," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Mark leaned in, his eyes widening in shock. The figure in the photo was an eerie echo of the one they had just seen in the video, but this time it was closer, almost personal. A heavy silence fell over them as they grappled with the reality of what they had captured. The excitement of the hunt had transformed into a chilling realization. They had found what they were looking for, but now it felt as if it had also found them. The shadow from the old willow graveyard was no longer just a story. It was real, and it had been right beside them, unseen and unknown. Until now. Mark's voice was steady, but tinged with urgency as he spoke. "We need to send these images to the show, get their take on it." Jenna nodded in agreement, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. As the digital clock on the nightstand flickered past midnight, Mark excused himself to shower and prepare for bed, leaving Jenna to pore over the images once more. The silence of the house seemed to amplify every creak and whisper of the wind, setting her nerves on edge. In the bathroom, the steam from the hot shower fogged up the mirror. Mark, lost in thought, wiped it away absently, but as the mist cleared, he caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure in the reflection. It was just a flash, a trick of light and shadow, but it was enough to send a jolt of fear through him. He let out a loud shout, startled. Jenna rushed in, concern etched on her face. "What is it?" Mark, still staring at the now clear mirror, said shakily, "I saw the figure, right here in the mirror." She peered into the mirror, but there was nothing unusual about their reflection. "There's nothing there now, Mark." He nodded, trying to shake off the feeling of dread. "Yeah, I know. It must have been my imagination." They retired to bed, the weight of the day's events bearing down on them. Jenna flicked on the TV, the low hum of documentaries providing a comforting, if monotonous, backdrop. As her eyelids grew heavy, she reached for the remote to turn off the TV, but in the glossy black screen of the television, just before it flicked to black, Jenna saw it, the shadowy figure, standing in the corner of the room. its form vague, but unmistakably there. She screamed, a sharp, piercing sound that shattered the night's calm. Mark bolted upright, his eyes wide. "What's going on?" "I saw it, Mark," Jenna gasped, her voice trembling. "In the TV reflection. It was here, in the room with us." Mark scanned the room frantically, but there was nothing out of place. He tried to calm her, his own heart racing. It could be our minds playing tricks. Lack of sleep can cause hallucinations, visual distortions. She nodded, trying to rationalize it, to quell the fear that was rapidly spreading through her. They lay back down, the darkness of the room feeling more oppressive than ever. Despite the unease, exhaustion eventually took over, and they drifted into a fitful sleep. But the night was far from peaceful. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound a whisper from another world. The line between reality and imagination blurred, leaving them in a limbo of fear and uncertainty. As they slept, the shadows in the room seemed to pulse with a life of their own, a dark heartbeat, echoing the terror that had taken root in their minds. The figure from the old willow graveyard was no longer just an image captured on camera. It was a presence, felt but unseen, lurking on the fringes of their reality, waiting in the reflections of their fears. Mark awoke to the muted light of early dawn, his mind still clouded with the eerie events of the previous night. Eager to share their findings, he settled into the living room to send the images to the paranormal show. The darkness of the room didn't bother him. He was too focused on the task at hand. As he reviewed the footage on his camera, replaying the video again and again, his eyes occasionally drifted to the corners of the room. In the dim light, the familiar shapes of furniture and decor took on sinister forms. Then he noticed it, a shape in the corner, darker than the surrounding shadows, an undefined mass of blackness. It was as if the darkness itself had gathered and condensed into a figure. Trying to dismiss it as a trick of his sleepy eyes, Mark flicked on his phone's flashlight and shone it into the corner. Nothing. The darkness receded, revealing only the ordinary corner of the room. Shaking his head, he attributed it to his overactive imagination and fatigue. Meanwhile, Jenna stirred in bed, her sleep disturbed by uneasy dreams. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, a paralyzing realization dawned on her. There, around her bed, stood 3 shadowy figures, formed from the darkness of the room. They were featureless, composed entirely of shadows, yet unmistakably humanoid, standing over her with an oppressive presence. Frozen in terror, Jenna's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe her eyes. It was as if the night had coalesced into these spectral forms. The figures just stood there, motionless, as if observing her. Finally, fear overcoming shock, she screamed out, "Mark!" Mark came running, the concern evident on his face. But as he entered the bedroom, the figures were gone. Jenna, still shaken, could barely speak. "Something's wrong," Mark said, his voice tense. "We need to get out of here, now." They hurriedly gathered some essentials, their minds racing with fear and confusion, but when they tried to open the front door, it wouldn't budge. It was as if an unseen force held it firmly shut. Panic rising, they rushed to the windows and the fire escape, but each route of escape was inexplicably jammed. Trapped inside their own home, the reality of their situation sank in. The shadows, the figures they had seen, were not just lingering haunts from the graveyard. They were here, with them, in their home, and now they were preventing them from leaving. The light of day seemed a world away as they stood in the dark, the sense of being watched by unseen eyes growing stronger. The shadows in the room seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, a silent threat that loomed over them. Mark and Jenna once hunters of the paranormal, now found themselves hunted, ensnared in a nightmare that was all too real. The boundary between their world and the realm of shadows had been crossed, and they were caught in the middle with no clear way out. Huddled together in the corner of their bedroom, Mark and Jenna watched in horror as the darkness seemed to seep and stretch from the corners of the room like inky tendrils reaching out towards them. The air was thick with a palpable sense of dread. The silence broken only by their shallow, rapid breaths. Then, emerging from the consuming shadows, the first figure appeared, its form more defined than before, yet still entirely composed of darkness. It was followed by two others, each as ominous and featureless as the last. The figures stood at the edge of the light, their presence an oppressive force that seemed to drain the very air from the room. Terrified, Mark and Jenna could do nothing but cry out, their voices a mix of panic and desperation. "What do you want?" Jenna screamed, her voice trembling, but the shadow figures offered no response, no indication of their intentions. They simply stood there, as if waiting, their silent vigil a torment in itself. Mark, his mind racing, began to piece together the horrifying truth. "They followed us," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "From the graveyard. We saw them, and they followed us home." Jenna's eyes widened with realization. "They want to draw us into their world, their shadow realm." The couple understood now the grave mistake they had made. In their pursuit of the paranormal, they had unwittingly opened a door, a bridge between their world and the shadow realm. The shadow people, guardians of that dark dimension, had marked them at the graveyard. By acknowledging and capturing their presence, Mark and Jenna had become targets, chosen to be pulled into the shadowy abyss. The shadow people were not mere observers. They were sentinels of a world unseen, a dimension where light and life as known in the human world did not exist. It was a place of forgotten souls, of entities that existed only in the absence of light, and now they sought to claim the couple as their own, to drag them into the eternal twilight of their realm. The reason for this chilling desire lay in the nature of the shadow people. They were drawn to life, to the energy of beings from a world of light and substance. In their realm of shadows, such energy was a rarity, a prize to be captured and consumed. Mark and Jenna, with their curiosity and fear, had shone like beacons in the darkness, attracting the attention of these entities. As the couple watched, the room grew colder, the darkness creeping closer with every passing second. The boundary between their world and the next was thinning, the veil lifting, and with it, the last of their hopes for escape. Trapped and powerless, Mark and Jenna faced the shadow figures, their fate hanging in the balance. The darkness was no longer just an absence of light. It was a presence, a living, breathing entity that sought to envelop them in its cold embrace. The shadows were closing in, and time was running out. Months had passed since that fateful night, and Mark and Jenna had become little more than a whisper, a mystery that lingered in the minds of those who knew them. Friends had called, leaving messages that were never returned, their concern growing with each passing day of silence. Eventually, the police were called in. A search was conducted, but no trace of the couple was ever found. Their disappearance remained an unsolved enigma, a cold case that left more questions than answers. In the wake of their vanishing, life continued its inexorable march forward. The world moved on, but for those who knew Mark and Jenna, their absence left a void filled with speculation and unease. Then, one evening, a new episode of Paranormal Mysteries Unveiled aired. its topic sending chills down the spines of those who had followed Mark and Jenna's story. The episode was titled Caught on Camera, Shadow People, A New Discovery. The host's voice, usually filled with excitement, carried a somber tone as he introduced the segment. The footage began in a familiar setting, the old willow graveyard, shrouded in the darkness of night. The camera panned across the ancient tombstones, the eerie silence of the place palpable even through the screen. Suddenly, the camera jerked, focusing on a particular spot. There, in the shadows between the graves, two figures could be seen. They were mere silhouettes, devoid of any discernible features, yet there was something undeniably human about them. One appeared male, the other female, standing side by side in the darkness. For a fleeting second, the figures were visible before they dissolved back into the shadows. The resemblance was uncanny. They bore a striking similarity to Mark and Jenna. The episode delved briefly into the myth of shadow people, entities said to exist in the fringes of our world, in a place where light and reality faded into darkness and legend. Theories abounded, from lost souls trapped between dimensions to guardians of a realm beyond human understanding. But the truth remained as elusive as the shadows themselves. The footage sparked a flurry of discussions and theories, but no definitive answers were ever found. The mystery of Mark and Jenna, and now these shadowy figures, deepened, becoming part of the lore surrounding the old willow graveyard. As the episode came to a close, the host's voice echoed a sentiment that resonated with all who had been touched by the couple's story. In the world of the paranormal, the line between fact and fiction is often blurred. We seek answers, but sometimes the universe keeps its secrets. Mark and Jenna sought the truth about the shadow people, and perhaps, in their quest, they found more than they bargained for. The screen faded to black, leaving viewers with a lingering sense of unease, a reminder of the mysteries that lay just beyond the reach of the light. In the shadows, secrets remained hidden, and some truths were perhaps better left undiscovered. Thank you for joining me on this chilling journey. If your thirst for the unknown and the unexplained is still unquenched, I invite you to delve deeper into the abyss of terror. Just beyond the veil of reality, another story awaits to send shivers down your spine. Dare to join me in the next video, where the unknown becomes known and the unseen seen. Until then, keep the lights dim and your mind open. This is Professor Shadow, signing off.